All right. Hello, everyone. Glad you're here. I see some familiar faces on the participant list. Glad to have you with us. And I see some new faces, so welcome. My name is Katrina VanHuss. I started this company 30 years ago. Oh my God, yes, that happened. Before even online fundraising. So I've watched it morph and change quite a bit. And the world continues to surprise me. We'll leave it at that. With me, I have Ryan Grosenick, who is our senior analyst. And between us, we do a lot of interpretation. I listened to a podcast that I just love called Pitchfork Economics. And one of the points it makes is that economics, which is basically looking at numbers and then forming a narrative, is not really a science. And so one of the things that Ryan and I like to do is, he brings the numbers, I bring the experience to the industry, and between us, we interpret. So you're going to get a lot of that today, interpretation, which is at the heart of it, economics. So with that, let's go forward.
Cool. Hi, everyone. I'm Ryan, and we're going to talk about this very tough year. And like Katrina said, we both looked at these numbers and came to different conclusions. So well, there might be a little on-screen debating going on. But so we're going to talk about some early results we've got on events affected by COVID. And this is early COVID. So back in the spring, we looked at a handful of organizations, and between them, there were about 500 events. So looking at those results, the averages, and what we can glean from that information. So we're going to start, assuming the PowerPoint will listen to me. There we go. So we're going to start with the big numbers. So first and foremost, participation was down on average about 47%. So if you were a typical event this year, you would typically expect about having half as many participants as you did last year. Now looking at fundraising, this is a little bit different. We only saw fundraising dip about 31%. So from my seat here, there's kind of a big gap between these. So when I look at this stuff, when I look at data, if you were to take a random group of participants, cut them in half, we would expect half of their fundraising to go with that half that we just pushed to the side. However, we're only seeing about a 31% drop. Now, that is a big difference. And it tells me, at least, that fundraising didn't fall nearly as much as it could have. And this could have been a lot worse. We're going to look into why. This is where the big debate is going to come into play, why this is. Now, with this kind of difference between participation and fundraising, we saw that average fundraising jumped up about 50% too. So, and this is just mostly due to you're losing about half of your participants. The ones that stay are most likely to fundraise, and that artificially raises the average fundraising. However, well, that's definitely part of it. Let me say that first and foremost. Another thing that we are seeing happening is that, yes, half of the participants are gone, but most of those participants were showing up and not doing anything anyway, right? So a lot of these participants were $0 fundraisers. A lot of them wouldn't engage even if we wanted to. We're losing that kind of dead weight and only holding on to the most engaged participants that we had before. Now, it's still, losing all those new folks still correlates to a big fundraising drop, but there's also other sources of that. So that's kind of my take on what's going on. I'm going to hand it over to Katrina for her take.
So my take, Ryan came in with like, oh, that's pretty good news. And I'm like, no, that's terrible news. That's terrible news. And the reason I think it's terrible news is not for today, today's bad, but for tomorrow and for next year and for year 5, because when we look at where our constituents land at the end of the day, what composes their lifetime value, it's not all peer-to-peer, but peer-to-peer is where they start. And so that's my concern. And there's no way to study it at this point. I only know of one organization that actually tracks where do people initially engage and then what happens after that. But what we know is this is going to have a large and cumulative effect the longer we don't acquire new fundraisers effectively. and new donors with them, the bigger impact it's going to have in a long tail kind of way. It's like negative compounding interest because we're not feeding the other revenue channels the way that we have been and the way that most sophisticated organizations view peer-to-peer. We're the front door, and the front door is not working right now. And this is, Ryan pointed this out. You want to jump into this one?
Yeah, so we'll jump into this in a second. So by and large, the one thing that we both agree on is that the folks that stayed are the most engaged, right? So looking at that piece of it. So for the participants that showed up this year, a much bigger piece of the participant pie, as I've been calling it recently, are joining teams. A much bigger piece returned from a previous year. And again, this is primarily because, you know, half of your participants are gone and most of those were new folks. And then a much bigger, or a bigger piece fundraised any amount at all. So between all of this, plus these kind of other smaller behaviors, like did they send an email to a friend? Did they create a Facebook fundraiser, update their page, etc.? All of this kind of accumulated into giving us more engagement out of our participants, right? Especially for this bottom bullet point right here. The folks that sent an email, create a Facebook fundraiser, update a personal page, etc. These folks typically will raise anywhere between 3 to 10 times more on average than the folks that don't. And since we're getting more of those participants, and since they're a little bit more inclined to do these things now during COVID, we're seeing that's helping the fundraising from being completely battered to the participant loss levels. At least, you know, from my seat. So engagement is a really big part of this here. However, there are some kind of, we'll call them warning signs, because while this is what's going on average, we did see a lot, you know, a good handful of participants, or not participants, organizations really suffer because these things didn't happen. And we're seeing a handful of organizations really shine through all of this because their participants took this stuff and ran with it. One phenomenon we're going to look at real quick is returners and how they are raising less than they did the year before. So this is not uncommon, right? Even before COVID, we'd see a lot of returners come back and just not raise the same amount that they did before. Keep in mind, they're raising hundreds of dollars. So even if they, you know, didn't raise as much before, they were still raising more than everyone else. However, during COVID, this is a big, horrifying exclamation point, because the reason that returners, or the reason that fundraising could be really affected by this is because if returners come back and not raise as much as they did before, they don't have that cushion of new participants to make up that difference. So let's say John Smith comes back 2 years before, you know, he can only raise $200 as opposed to $300. Now in a normal year, you'd have maybe 5 or 6 new participants or just lesser engaged participants that won't raise as much, make up that $100 that he didn't. But now we don't have that cushion, so that $100 difference multiplied over many different returners can turn into this really big fundraising shortfall. Now this is the big exclamation point. By and large, we did see returners raise a little bit less, but the new folks that did show up helped keep it mostly okay. And that's why fundraising, or that's part of the reason fundraising didn't drop as much as participation. However, for all the events coming up and all the events in 2021, this is going to be a really big, important metric to look at, because if you don't have the new folks to make up that difference, it will hurt really bad in the long run, and Katrina is going to talk about that right now. You're muted.
I'm battling fall pollen in Virginia. So participation was down, and that was the new participants. The impact over years is significant, and intuitively, I think we all know that, although we don't have the data to support it when we're talking to the other revenue channels when we're talking to major giving and middle giving. Most of us don't possess the data to say, in 3 years, you will have 15% fewer leads to work because of this year for us. And imagine that going on through 2021, which is going to make that number bigger. So my entreaty is to at least throw that flag to them, that we're not acquiring new leads to push into your revenue channels the way that we did before. That was part of our job. Sadly, we didn't really have a performance metric on that, but that was at least half of our job when we really look at the numbers about where direct response, middle and major giving, even transformational gifts, where did they initiate? It was with your work. The other thing that's happening that is problematic is that we're all scrambling to find new ways to make up that revenue and make up the acquisition. And we're having great success. We've got 2 partners we use, Good United and Get Your Story Straight, that are helping us acquire new revenue and new donors. And most of those people are new. And some of our clients are interpreting that as, great, you're going to fill both the revenue pipeline and you're going to fill the new donor and new fundraiser pipeline. So we're good. We are not good. These people are not like the others. Someone who is acquired, and most of the people coming in as Facebook fundraisers now, either through groups or with organic birthday fundraisers, they are brand new and they don't have the level of affinity to the organization that a traditional peer-to-peer fundraiser would have. So even though you've got names and you're passing them along in most cases, even though data acquisition, that's why we use people like Good United and Get Your Story Straight. Even though you're giving data, it's not the same kind of data. These people are on Facebook because they didn't want to really get that close to us. So the front door is shut for traditional peer-to-peer, and where it is open, a different kind of fundraisers coming in. For us to, really get in their shorts and grow affinity and get them to exhibit behaviors that reinforce their affinity, it's really hard because they're interacting on Facebook, which is a place to get stiff-armed in terms of getting closer to them. So that's my big rant for the day. Okay, keep going. So what do we do about it? Well, we do what all of you are doing. I saw names, Maureen with CFF. You guys have done a brilliant job of pivoting, and we are in fact creating new business models. The business models that we are seeing have success are business models that help give back what COVID took away. And what COVID took away was community. I'll give you an example. This is not one of our clients. This is a Great Cycle Challenge Children's Cancer Research Fund, I think. Their app, which has been online for 3 or 4 years now, actually lets people gather in communities by matching up cyclists by zip code who want to ride together, whether it's to simply be together or to fundraise together. That singular component drove their success. Their goal in 2020 was $8 million. They're at 14 million. And part of that is that people were looking for a way to get together, but by gum, they had it. They had it. If you wanted to cycle and you wanted community, then you were going there. Roswell also has done some really amazing things in the cycling community to let people be together. One of the clients that we have, and do I have permission to use their name, Ryan? I think we can. Okay, they're killing it. They can yell at me if they want to. Church World Service. I thought they were going to be just tanked because churches are closed. So how is it that they're going to make their business model work? Their business model is peer-to-peer executed through church congregations. In fact, what held them together was the congregation. That was their built-in community, and they're only 5% down for the year. So there is success to be had. It is really about meeting constituent need. We've talked about this a lot on past webinars. Constituents need 3 things to be happy and satisfied. They need autonomy. Am I in charge? They need to be recognized for mastery. Am I good at fundraising or something else? And they need connection. And connection is the leg of the stool that is gone right now. Giving it back spells success. And that is that. Go ahead, Ryan.
To John at CWS, we hear you.
Yeah, thank you, John.
Yeah,
so proud of you guys.
Church World Service was a really, really big win in the space. And we've seen a couple other organizations make applesauce out of these apples that was a bad analogy, but you get what I mean. So moving forward, using Church World Service and other organizations that are doing well as an example, what do we look out for, right? So starting with the big things we need to keep in mind moving forward, or at least what we're looking for short term, we want to track less team interaction, any stagnant activation, and returners raising less than they did the year before. So to Katrina's point earlier, less team interaction means less community, means, and team members and team captains by and large do better than individuals. And they're more likely to stick around too than individuals. So team interaction is a big one. If you see less folks joining teams, that's a big red flag. Same with stagnant activation. If the same percentage of participants are fundraising this year compared to last year, it's probably a bad sign, because you're losing just as many engaged participants as you are not engaged participants. And since all your money is with the engaged participants who are fundraising, your fundraising is going to go along with them. And same thing with returners raising less. So in a normal year, yes, it's normal. Moving forward, you really want to keep a sharp eye on it, because we might not be able to make up that difference. In the long term, we want to really keep an eye on, not acquiring new participants. Katrina, do you have any, maybe you already covered it, but recommendations for acquiring new fundraisers during all of this?
Hardest thing we do right now. In my mind, acquisition is best accomplished the way it's always been accomplished. Human rules remain the same, regardless of the environment. And human rules are this: the most credible message is delivered by your friend. So acquisition through peers is the best thing in town. When we acquire that way, they turn into something more. When we acquire through, as an example, Facebook fundraising, I am all about the money, yay, but the behaviors of those fundraisers are less contributory to lifetime value. That's the best way I can say it. So peer-to-peer acquisition, I think, is the money.
Cool. And moving forward, so these are our warning signs. Moving forward, the way we think is the best way of trudging through these difficult times is, first and foremost, to focus very strongly on your MVPs, right? So your most engaged participants are keeping you alive during these times, right? So make them feel as good as possible about that, because without them, worse times are coming. While we're also making them feel good, we also maybe want to, give them a little tap on the shoulder to do a little bit more. So if they haven't done, if they haven't updated their personal page, if they haven't created a Facebook fundraiser, etc., just give them a little nudge to do so.
One thing, Ryan, I would lean in to encourage, Ryan used the word nudge here, and that is what you're doing is, when you nudge them to do things like this, is you're deploying behavioral economics to get a behavior. When you think about your audience, they are experiencing everything your staff is experiencing. They feel disconnected. They've lost their community. They're depressed. So if you can figure out ways to give that back to them, whether it's in the context of fundraising or in the context of mission delivery or whatever context you can, give it to them, because that's what we're seeing as positive and as valuable, is giving them something that helps them personally, is helping them turn to us as their friend, because really that's the relationship we're after. We are their friend. The second thing I would say is that in the way you craft your communications, in the way that you ask them, for example, to create a Facebook fundraiser, that's a fantastic thing, because we're going to nudge them to create it, and then they nudge themselves through the overt behavior on Facebook, and they get recognized that way. They have autonomy that way, and they're part of something bigger that way. But in your messages, when you talk to them, what we want to reinforce is the kind of person they are. The reason you're doing this is because you care deeply about world hunger. You care deeply about people with cystic fibrosis. You care deeply. That's the way we talk to them, because we're using nudges to get them to exhibit a behavior, and then we're using psychology to get them to reinforce their identity. Whoever thought in a world where identity politics is like the worst curse you can throw at someone, that we can use it for good, because it's really, really powerful. The identity that we foster, that we nurture, and that we help them create is for good, because they are good. Okay, rant over, keep going.
That's a perfect segue into the last big thing. If you can pull it off, find ways to build more community, to reinforce them, feeling good about their identities and stuff. So, like we said earlier, Church World Service, organizations that are weathering the storm best have strong communities. And like at the bottom of the page there, participants that stick around together, fundraise more together. And just to throw some stats out there, for organizations like this, their participation loss was only about 20% on average, and their fundraising loss was only 8%. So compare that to 47 and 31. Those are major that's major retention of participants and funds.
Can you read Shana's question, Ryan? Because you can probably answer it better than I can answer it. It's a good one.
Okay, so if average fundraising is up due to less $0 participants, but return of fundraising is down, and there aren't as many new participants, that would indicate that fundraiser average is also down. Do you know how much that number is down by? Not off the top of my head. I have to go do some digging. But I'm doing all algorithmic averages right now. But we could find that out for y'all and send it out with the deck, I believe.
One thing I want to layer onto this slide is that find ways to build community. In our crisis, when we were all panicking, we did the best we could, and I think we did well. What that manifested as, in many cases, is that we talked at our audiences, and that would, we were darn creative to just be able to do that. But what our audiences need is each other. They don't actually need us to talk to them. Some of the pilots that we're doing with Facebook groups and using forms to get people in there and collect data, what we're learning is this: we don't need a presence. Like, the organization doesn't need a presence. They don't want us to talk to them. They want to talk to each other. Now, the organization can have a person in there who is branded as an individual or has an identity of an individual who is fostering conversation, but they don't want to hear from, a faceless, nameless identity. They want to hear from people. So that's what we're seeing as successful. And when we have more time, which we do now, we can find ways to build interaction. And it's challenging. One of the things that conversation we've been having with the Tech Soup group is platforms are going to be impacted forever by this, because platforms, traditional peer-to-peer platforms, they were built to fundraise. And now people are having opportunities to get their psychological itches scratched on platforms that were not built to fundraise, like Instagram and Facebook. And so those platforms have fundraising tools as secondary devices. We, in the traditional market, we've never built those community tools in a significant way. We've toyed around with it, but we haven't made that our reason to be. And the fundraisers are telling us that is the reason they're there, for community, for autonomy, and for recognition. And we have not done well at giving them community outside of the event day. We gave it to them one time a year, one day, that's it, that's all you get. And now other people, other platforms, other environments are giving it to them better and more often than we are.
Mm-hmm. With that, we can open it up for Q&A.
All right. So,
and if it would be, for everyone who wants to ask questions, please use the Q&A thing instead of the chat, just because it's a little bit easier to keep track of.
It is. I also wanted to address, someone in the poll said, I wish we knew how to approach donors. There are gobs of webinars on our website that our in-house psychologist tells you exactly how to approach donors. What can you say and be fairly aggressive that will not cause feelings of anxiety and or of feeling like, oh, too much. So I would point you to our website for that. I think the webinar is actually called What to Say Right Now. It was the first COVID webinar that we did. All right. I wanted to let you guys know, we got some questions coming in. I wanted to let you guys know we will have a webinar coming up, profiling, hopefully, Children's National. They they pivoted and they are 100 grand above goal. So we'll pull in the consultants who worked with them and understand what they did, how they did it, and share that with you. That will be coming up. All right, so question, is Turnkey able to build customer service surveys for our events statewide and have Ryan analyze so we can see where event satisfaction and participant needs need to be addressed? I'm going to answer that if you don't mind, Ryan. In terms of statistics, yes. In terms of people's ability to answer that question accurately, we humans are really, really bad at that. So what we prefer to do is to get all the data from all the data sources, let Ryan analyze it, and then interpret it. We and others have had little success in getting participants to tell us what they need and want, because we're just not very good at that as a species. From Sean, can you detail a bit more what orgs did that built strong communities, and how do you define that? The way I define that is anytime I make it easy for people who share a common interest or passion to talk to each other, to be with each other, to collaborate with each other, that's community. Examples of communities would be, I'm going to use Relay for Life because I think they did it really best. The volunteer leadership committee, that was a community. And they were very connected to each other and to their mission. And one of the things about that particular organization and the way they ran it, particularly in their heyday, is that they were, it was, forgive me, John, it was almost like a church. Like they were that into it. It was a part of their life. And so by community, it met many of their psychological needs. In terms of online communities, a community can be, as an example, a thread in a Facebook conversation. A community can be a group on Facebook. A community could be the people following an Instagram post. I mean, community is what you define it. Productive communities typically are, oddly, about 150 people. They are, and the reason that's a productive community is because above 150 people, anonymity sets in and shame doesn't work anymore to control behavior. So those groups grow toxic. So, those are just some of the ways to help build healthy communities.
Also, the way we measure it, or at least approximately measure it, and I'm going to use Church World Service again as an example. We saw with them that their team interaction increased. So more participants were joining teams, but also just the way that Church World Service works too, or the way a lot of folks do stuff, is they will fundraise as a church instead of as individuals. So it's their whole community is kind of baked into the whole participant experience. So that's another big factor of why we think they did so well, all things considered, because they weren't ever alone in any part of the process. And any folks that were alone were on teams, or they were participating together with other participants in some way, shape, or form. And they did more of it this year than they did previously. So
we have John. John, would you be open to speaking on the call? If you're, I think you're still with us. If you could chat me. This is like, what are they, like Iron Chef? Like you get 4 ingredients, John, go. All right. Yes. Okay. I'm going to open you up to speak.
I promoted him to panelist already.
All right.
We're good to go.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tessie. All right, John, I think you're on mute right now. If you can come off mute.
Okay.
Hi there. How are you?
I'm great.
Surprise, you're on a webinar.
Yeah, I guess.
Anyway, we're super proud of you guys and everything you've accomplished. Can you talk a little bit more about what Ryan was talking about?
Yeah, I mean, historically, we have had our teams be part of church communities. To go along with that, we really try to gather our team leaders a number of times over the spring to bring them together on, we called it a town hall Zoom. So we would have over 100 people on a Zoom call with also helping them to make connections between themselves, so that as an event coordinator, you didn't feel alone and felt supported by staff, but also by your peers. So I mean, we did try at a number of different levels to make sure people felt connected.
I love it. And so the leader that you're speaking of is a volunteer leader at the church level, right?
Correct, yes.
Okay, excellent. Very good. Thank you for that. And congratulations on your success this year.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Very good. All right. I don't see any other questions. I think we're good. If anybody has any questions about the work we do or the work Ryan does in specific, don't be shy. Give us a holler. We are actively collecting stories and data right now to try and understand what's happening in the market best. The results are just coming out, and there are a few winners, and the winners seem to be connected to community. That is seeming to be the winner. So anyway.
So Katrina and Tessie were informed me that we'll be doing 4 hours for free to a random person. 126 registrants were placed into this thing right here. And the winner is, if it'll work for me, please. Thank you, Carolyn Ritchie. So Carolyn Ritchie, Melanoma Research Alliance. So let's talk.
All right, excellent, very good. Yeah, surprise, Ryan. These are our account executives, Joanne and Kate. Many of you know them. So if you have any questions, those are your best route to a good answer. All right, I think we're done here. Thank you, people. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.